I've been working in livestock handling for a lot of years, more years than I really want to talk about, ever since the early 70s. And when I first started, I thought I could fix everything for livestock with equipment. If I could just build the right equipment, it would self-manage itself. No. You have the right equipment, it's going to make it much easier to handle the livestock, but it's not going to be self-managing. You still have got to have people that are good at stockmanship. And oftentimes, people want the magic thing more than they want the good stockmanship and the management. And I've gotten more and more into the good stockmanship side of it. Oh, wait a minute. No, this is not, okay. Now, handling's improved. When I first started back in the 70s, cattle handling was absolutely horrible. Electric prod on every animal, screaming at them and all of that. People are really getting into low-stress handling. That is really good, so much better. But still, too many people make too much noise. They've got this urge to make noise. And the problem is, if you scream at cattle and they get all upset, it takes 20 minutes for them to calm back down. Too many cattle in the crowd pen. That is still a problem, because good handling, you've got to do more walking. Another big mistake I see when you've got cattle in a single file chute is to stand at the head and poke the butt with a paddle or a flag. That doesn't work. You're telling it to go forward and backward at the same time. This is a research that my former student, Lilia Callaway Edwards, did, looking at beef quality assurance, how many people are actually doing really good beef quality assurance things. About 66% of the ranches were really great, and about 17% were really bad. Let's put a hot shot on all of everything. So the percentage of people that have improved is really, really improved. But we still have got a few places doing some stuff they just shouldn't be doing. Now, to be good at stockmanship, you need to be a really good observer, observing little things. How many people know what that is in that picture? There are eclipse pictures, like little pinhole cameras. That is on the sidewalk right next to our library at CSU. I watched probably 100 students walk over this. They didn't notice these weird, funky shadows. I immediately noticed the weird shadows. I didn't even know eclipses made these kind of shadows. So I go, wait a minute, we got some really weird shadows here in the front of the library. I noticed that. Cattle also notice shadows. Now, my student Dennis Wilson did a nice experiment at a small abattoir, and look at how the shadows in that chute changed throughout the day. And when it was cloudy, you had no shadows. That was the ideal situation. And the sharp shadows, you had a lot more cattle stopping and a lot more yelling and electric prod use. So this might explain why cattle handling might be going really good, then it all of a sudden kind of gets bad when the clouds shift. I was just talking to one of the beef plants the other day, and when the sun comes up over this one part of the facility, it's just horrible. I said, you know what, you're going to have to build a building over it. They didn't really want to hear that. In fact, I'd like you to go to a greenhouse company and build a building over it that's made with white translucent panels. So it lets in lots of shadow-free light, so you don't have the dark movie theater effect going from sun into the building. A calm animal is always easier to handle. If an animal gets all upset and scared, it takes 20 minutes to calm back down. Yeah, let's not get them upset. And if they do get upset, 20 minutes to calm back down. We had a situation where a news photographer terrified some of our horses with drones. We were supposed to ride them, for publicity. Not these horses. They were all dressed up in Western tack and they were rearing because this news photographer took a drone and went at them like that. Really stupid. I waited 20 minutes. They became rideable. That's how long it took. Okay, you've got a man fell off there. He knows how to fall, not smash his head and break his wrists. But the horse is going to be pretty scared because the saddle's coming off. That's an example of sudden novelty. That can really scare an animal. And this is where the animals with the flighty genetics will have a bigger reaction to sudden novelty than the animals with the calmer genetics. Now, how can you tell if cattle are starting to get scared? They put the head up, ears pinned back. When they start pooping, it's because you scared the poop out of them. So if your corral's all full of what after you're done, you probably scared a lot of poop out of them. When horses and cattle switch their tail, that means they're starting to get really upset. That's the warning before they kick you or bite you. Eye white. When the whites of the eyes are showing, they're really scared. Here's an example of staring straight into the sun, and cattle handling is going to be awful. This is just like when you're out on the freeway and the sun blinds you just as it comes up. And when I drive to the airport, there's one patch of the toll road that's really bad. I try to time it so I don't get that blinding light. Little distractions we tend to not notice, cattle notice. Look at how you can see the car through the fence. And there's a reflection on that car. There's a little plastic bottle there. And when that was kind of moving in the wind, going, the cattle notice these little things. Now, if you bring your cattle up nice and calm, they'll stop and look right at the stuff they don't like. They'll stop and look at it. You bring them up crazy, they turn back on you. But they'll show you the stuff they don't like. Chains hanging down. I still have to talk to people about tying the chains up that are hanging down. This is what I call the dark movie theater. We're really sunny outside. We've got a building completely over this facility, and it's like a black hole in there. Now, what could be done to fix this would be to tear the tin off the back and replace it with white translucent plastic. Not transparent, translucent. I want to let light in there without shadows. Now, at night, this is going to work just fine. Light it up at night. They head for the light. Works just great. Really sunny day, doesn't work very well. Here's an example of some white translucent panels that were put in the wall to help to get the cattle into the dark building that had the cattle handling facility in it. Now, right here, we got a leader stopping at a puddle. Give that leader a chance to look, put the head down, and look. And Ron Gill from Texas A&M explains, wait until she brings the head back up before you push it. If you push her when the head's down, they're going to turn back on you. Give that leader a chance to look at that puddle, bring the head back up, then you push it. And when she splashes across the puddle, the other cattle are probably going to go. Backstop gates. Might be a good idea to put a remote control rope on that gate so you can hold it open for the cattle. Don't make them all go clumping through there. Now, one thing that's good is this gate has a very high pivot point. Cattle are a whole lot taller today. That high pivot point, they're not going to worry about hitting their back on that. But if that pivot point's too low, especially with some of these real tall cattle, they may not want to go in there. I can't emphasize enough, small groups brought up into the crowd pen. You know, it might be only 4 or 5 large cows you bring up at a time into the crowd pen. This is something I constantly have to stay on top of this. You need to figure out in your facility what works really well on the group size. Then you have to enforce it. In the biggest meat packing plant, it's like 15 you bring up at a time. Not 30, 15 big fat steers. Good handling, it's going to require more walking. Yeah. Fill the crowd pen half full. And one place where I really recommend having a solid gate is that back crowd gate. That really needs to be solid. Now this bunch of sheep here really shows the flight zone nice. Animals' personal space. See how it's kind of a circle? Now the size of that flight zone is going to vary depending upon their genetics, the amount of contact with people, and the quality of contact. Cattle that have people walking through them all the time, I noticed a bunch of sheep that were here too, animals that get used to having people walk through them, they're going to have a smaller flight zone. Now in this picture, you can see how they're walking around the edge of the bubble. And the handler is just moving a little bit like this, and they're just filing out of that pen really nice. Now on my website, Grandin.com, just my last name, I have a video that shows this. And, you know, just let them file out nice and calm. Now this diagram is a little bit complicated, but basically what I want to show in this diagram is that there's 2 zones around the cattle. There's the flight zone. When you enter the flight zone, they move away. But there's also a zone where they turn around and they look at you. Now right behind the rear, there's a small blind spot. You don't want to just go up behind a horse and surprise them in the blind spot. It's where you're going to get kicked. Now the dotted line represents a single file chute. If I want them to go forward, I got to be behind that point of balance at the shoulder. Don't stand at the head and poke the butt. That doesn't work very well. Now right here, I entered the flight zone of these Angus cattle, but look at how the tan one's looking at me. He didn't get up, but he's turning and looking. And then the cattle that are eating, I'm too far away to have an effect on their behavior. But it's kind of like there's a flight zone, and then there's a zone where they know you're there. Some people call it the cattle want to see you zone, pressure zone, influence zone, awareness zone. It has all these different names, and it's all the same thing. Now, this is the very handy-dandy way to get an animal to go into the squeeze chute without the electric prod. Let's pretend this is the tailgate of a squeeze chute, and they're lined up here. You step forward, quickly walk back by them. You got to do it kind of quick, because if you just do it kind of slow, let's say you just go like this, they just back up on you. Quickly walk back by them in the opposite direction of how you want them to go. It works. And what made my day is when a lady who worked at one of the feed yards tried that. She went back to her feed yard and she tried it, and she was so happy to see how it worked. Now, this particular facility, I have a solid outer fence, because that's where it's the most important to have a solid fence, when everybody parks all the trucks along the fence and they're making the animals stop. If you have an open side on a facility, you got to stay away from it until it's time to move the cattle. Because if you go up there and you stand in their flight zone when they're in the single file chute, they're going to be jumping all around, or maybe even rearing. You stay away from that until it's time to move your cattle. This place down in Australia, you can see the truck looks different. They had two identical cattle handling facilities at this feed yard. One that worked really well and one that didn't. And the bad one had the view of the truck, and the good one did not. And I pointed out the truck, and they went, duh. They didn't realize that the reason why this one didn't work that well is the truck was there with all the people on it. The other facility didn't have that. Rearing in the chute, when that happens, back away. Don't try to push them down. Back away. Back away. Get out of the flight zone. They'll usually go back down. Now, how long should I make my single file chute? I like to make it long enough so I can get 4 or 5 cows in there, so I can get some following behavior. So I can fill the crowd pen and then maybe bring 4 cows in, they just go right on in. What I don't want to do is fill the crowd pen up when this is full, and then they all turn around on you. This is timing bunches. You wait until this is just about empty, then you bring some cattle up, and they can go right in. Now, sometimes something as simple as putting a piece of cardboard on the back half of the squeeze chute so they don't see you will facilitate getting the animals to come in, because then they don't see you standing at the controls. Now, some of the new really fancy hydraulic chutes, they've got the controls out on a swing arm, so that when you're working those controls, you're not in the flight zone. Well, on manual chutes, you'll be there in the flight zone. Something as simple as a piece of cardboard on the back half can sometimes make a big difference. But it's very important to use a stiff material, because if you put something on there that flaps, that's not going to work. Down in Brazil, they did a study where they just did some really simple things, and it lowered the stress hormone, cardboard on the chute, getting rid of yelling, banning dogs in the corrals. I hate dogs in the corrals. Biting cattle in the chute, teaching cattle how to kick you. I've seen some very nice dogs out in the field, but I hate them in the corrals. And then how about electric prods? I don't believe in a total ban on electric prods, but get it out of your hand. It is never a primary driving tool. What we do with our electric prod at the experiment station, it's kept in a cabinet. And if you've got an animal that absolutely won't go in the squeeze chute, you use it once and then you put it away. That's the only place you use it. That's better than beating it or cranking the tail and hurting her tail. Okay, there's been a lot of discussion about open versus solid sides. I've been in this industry now for 50 years. A lot of the cattle we've got now, they're much gentler than the cattle we had 30 years ago. My student, Bridget Voisinay, did some of the very first temperament research. And we had a radical hypothesis that animals that go berserk in squeeze chutes would have lower weight gain. That turned out to be true. So we've been doing 20 years of temperament selection. Well, some of the wild beasts we had in the 70s, I think we needed the solid sides. But it takes more skill to use a chute that has an open side. I still recommend covering outer perimeters to cover up all the trucks and those kind of distractions. And you've got to lay things out correctly. One of the most critical areas is right where your single file joins the crowd pen. When that animal's nose is right at that entrance to that single file, it needs to be able to see up there about 10 feet. If it can't see up there, it's not going to go. Now, why curved? Because as they come around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. Cattle have a natural behavior to go back to where they came from. That's a natural cattle behavior. All right, this shows the right and the wrong way to lay out a curved facility. The crowd pen radius there is 12 feet. Do not use a gate longer than 12 feet. They don't work. There's some things I've learned. You can go down to 10 foot, but do not go longer than a 12 foot. And do not lay it out where that dotted line is. That's not going to work. They've got to be able to see a place to go before they go up the bend. And you notice there's a few copies of the Humane Livestock Handling book left. That has all the facilities that are welded, has all the construction drawings for building welded facilities. Then my other book, Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals, there was one copy left, and then you'll have to get them on Amazon. But that has portable handling facilities. But I'm really glad you've got a great welding program here. And I noticed they were really buying the book that had the welded facilities. Now, a lot of these Angus cattle are much fatter today, so some of the chutes might be a little bit too narrow. Probably going to need to go a couple of inches wider. Some of these really fat cattle. Now, I get asked to make some simpler designs. This you can lay out in portable panels. A solid outer perimeter, and then you stand right there on that little grating at the crowd pen pivot, and they'll come right around you. That can work really nice. That can be made out of portable panels. It can also be made out of, welded. There's another layout that's pretty simple to make. Solid on the outside, partially see-through on the inside. I like to have it solid at least this far up. Let's keep their legs in it. And then you don't have to get up on the catwalks. I'm 77 now. I don't like to jump off the catwalks anymore. But then you have to stay away from that open side until it's time to step into the flight zone and move them. Now this is the bud box layout. You probably have heard of this. Super simple. Really good if you have to haul portable panels around set-up facilities. But it's going to require more skill to operate than some of the crowd pen, my original designs. The principle here is you put the cattle in there, you stand in the box, they bounce back, come back around you. Now what you put in the box has to fit in the lead-up. This works really poorly if you try to store cattle in it. And if you got a bunch of wild ones, I probably wouldn't use this. But where this has made the most sense is people that are doing pasture rotation in Nebraska, and they got to haul the equipment around. And flat panels are easier to haul around. Now, it's got to be laid out correctly. You got a lot of people today that don't know how to draw a drawing, and there's bud box drawings on there. They're horrible. They're not to scale. And in my livestock handling class, I teach students how to do a scale drawing. And I've had students that have never used a ruler to measure anything now. I don't know what they teach in school anymore. Now, this is kind of a combination design, the bud reverse flow tub. And what you do here is you put the cattle in there, then you shut the gate, and they just turn around and go back. Kind of combines both systems, but you don't have to be in there with them. But these things work best. What you put in the crowd pen got to fit in the lead-up chute. So you're going to be moving more and more small groups of cattle. Also, Grandin.com has got all these layouts on it. What's the best driving aid? Some people are saying none. I like the flags. I'm seeing the flags are getting more and more popular. I think the paddles are too heavy. I don't really like them. Then people beat animals with them. But don't be flapping that flag all around. Just use it in the crowd pen to turn an animal, to guide an animal. Okay, ranches that used a lot of electric prods, they had a lot more falling down and stumbling and stuff. I don't believe in banning it, but get it out of your hand. You have to go get it. And the occasional animal that doesn't want to get in the squeeze chute. This just shows some really nice built-in-place metal construction, nice concrete construction. Now, with all the interest in welding, I'm probably going to be having more and more welded facilities. But as I travel around, I'm seeing places nobody knows how to weld. It's all portable panels. And people ask me, which facilities do you like the best? I like really nice hand-welded ones the best. Now, there's kind of two concepts to designing. I can go simple, like the bud box, but it requires more skill, or something a bit more expensive, but it requires less skill and less training. You know, there's a place for both kinds of designs. If I have to haul panels around, I'd much rather haul flat panels around. Curved stuff's a pain in the you-know-what to haul around. I can't emphasize enough the importance of non-slip flooring. You don't have non-slip flooring, animals are skidding around, they panic, you might be standing in the scale and they're going like this because that foot's slipping, it's just making them crazy. Also on a squeeze chute, if you have a hydraulic chute, make sure it stops automatically before you squash them. And if they move when you squeeze them, you're hurting them. It's that simple. You know, make sure that pressure control's set right and somebody hasn't messed around with it. Non-slip flooring. Okay, now how many of you noticed that that animal was looking at that sunbeam? That's the kind of stuff I want you to notice. 2 hours later, that sunbeam's going to be gone. But that can really mess up your handling, and mess up your handling in any kind of facility design. Now, this is some data that my student, Ruth Woolywody, who's now a professor at the University of Nebraska, took 10 years ago, the beef quality assurance, handling measurement. I'm a big believer in measurements. You measure things like prod use, slipping and falling, cattle vocalizing when you restrain them. You can tell, am I getting better or am I getting worse? Because you manage the things that you measure. It's sort of just like police using speed cameras out on the highway. Well, if they didn't have the breathalyzers and the speed cameras, can you imagine the drunken racetrack you're going to have out on that highway? This is the original temperament work that my first graduate student, Bridget Voisinay, did back in the early 90s. And what she found that cattle scored a 4, that was our berserk rating, they had lower weight gain. Now, do animals have emotions? When I did some of my papers back in the early 90s, I wasn't allowed to use the word fear in the paper. Reviewers made me take it out and call the behavior agitated. We now know animals do have emotion. They have fear, they have anger, they have panic, which is separation distress. That's a different emotion than fear. You take the calf away, that's separation distress. Then you have the urge to explore. Some animals go out and graze a lot of pasture. Okay, while I'm on the subject of grazing, I did a paper on grazing because I got sick and tired of cattle being bashed as horrible environment wreckers. It's called Grazing Cattle, Sheep, and Goats Can Be an Important Part of a Sustainable Agricultural Future. It's a free download. And I reviewed a lot of research on pasture rotation, cover crops. You do these things right, it improves land. It takes 3 to 5 years for it to start working. What a lot of people don't realize is 20% of the world's land can only be grazed. We need to be raising food on that land. It's just that simple. Grazing animals may be part of the solution. Also, we've had horrible fires. And grazing animals can work on fire mitigation, especially goats. They'll come in and eat up all kinds of stuff. I looked at that fire that happened in Hawaii. You had dead grass this tall on abandoned sugarcane fields. That should have been grazed. If that had been grazed, maybe they wouldn't have lost the town. We lost 1,000 houses in Denver. This all happened after I wrote this paper. The Hawaii thing did. There was a field that wasn't mowed. Been grazed or mowed, maybe they wouldn't have lost 1,000 houses. And then in LA, they had a lot of rain, lots of shrubs grew, and then it died with the drought. If we don't have grazing, you're going to have all kinds of woody stuff that's going to be fire-getting. No, grazing is part of the solution to keeping land good. Now, both experience and innate affect how cattle behave. Like if you have an animal with a more fearful temperament, and he's in an environment where he knows everything, he'll be calm. But if something weird happens, like a hot air balloon lands on the ranch, that animal's going to have a bigger reaction than the animal with the less calm temperament. This is an interesting study that was done at New Mexico State University with the go-getters and the laid-back cows. Some cows grazed a lot more pasture than others, and there were genetic differences related to sire. Some cattle are more willing to climb hills than others. On the other hand, don't overselect for temperament. What I'm very concerned right now is we're overselecting animals for a single trait. I don't want to have a dull head that maybe won't take care of her calf. You overselect for any trait, you're going to wreck your animal. I'm very concerned about all the congestive heart failure that we're getting now. That used to just be high altitude sickness. They're getting it in Kansas at 2,000-foot elevation, and it's related to sires and genetics. And when you select for get heavy at a really young age, that's one of the traits that's related to congestive heart failure. A lot of bad feet and legs, twisted toenails, that's a defect. Don't breed that. That's a defect. Toenails are twisted. They've never been fed grain. That's a defect. This is something I'm getting very concerned now. Some of the animals that we're breeding. Now, Brahmins, if you treat them gently and stroke them, they can be really nice. You want to stroke an animal. Don't pat an animal like this. I see people do this at horse shows. Stroke it. Stroke it. That's what you want to do with your animal. Now, what I want to show in this slide is when you force animals to do stuff with a lot of rough handling, the stress hormone just gets off the wall, the amount of cortisol stress hormone you have. You have quiet handling. You have them voluntarily going through the facility. You don't have all that stress hormone. Went out to a really nice ranch that Highland cattle today. He's doing pasture rotation. And when they rotate, they got to go through the corrals. So then that's associated with getting yummy new pasture. That makes it a positive thing. It's very important that an animal's first experience with a new person, a new vehicle, a new place like the corral is a good first experience. If the first experience with a new place is terrible, they don't forget it. That's true with any animal. Let's make first experiences with new things good. Now, there's a lot of research that shows that good stockmanship matters, but it doesn't get enough credit. They'll buy the fancy new corral, but they don't necessarily use it right. There's some more research. I can give you all kinds of research on how good stockmanship makes more productive cattle. If I take something novel, like a photography equipment box, and put it in the pasture, they'll all come up to it. See, novelty is attractive if they can voluntarily approach. It's scary when you shove it in their face. And I'll have people say to me, my horse was fine at home, he went crazy at the show. Well, let's get him used to things you have at the show: flags, bikes, and balloons. So I would decorate the corral with flags, let them come up to them. Let's just put a bike out in the middle of the pasture and let them come up to it. And then you would slowly just move it around. I talked to a dairy group a few months ago, and there was a dairyman, he has a wheelchair, his cows are used to it. He went to his friend's dairy, rolled into the milking parlor, and the cows freaked. They had never seen a wheelchair. You know, that's something that should have been introduced more carefully. Animal memories are specific, because an animal lives in a sensory-based world. And I talked in my earlier talk about visual thinking. The memories are sensory. Was it seeing, hearing? And so if you train a horse to tolerate a blue and white umbrella, that doesn't transfer to a tarp, because that tarp looks totally different. If they're used to just seeing you in a truck, they might have no flight zone. You get out of that truck, the flight zone's bigger. Think about it. Tarps and umbrellas, they look totally different. Now, this is a study that one of my grad students did, Megan Corrigan, along with Sarah Matlock, faculty member. Now, look at how that play set looks different when it's rotated. And this may explain why a horse spooks for no reason. So they walked fillies and colts by this a whole bunch of times till they no longer stopped, they no longer looked at it, they no longer tossed their heads. When that thing was rotated, it became a new object. Everything was done at a walk. I didn't want anything dangerous happening. So I repeated the experiment with a big green chair, and I had Western riders walk by it. And when it was rotated 90 degrees, half the horses hard stop. If that had been in a gallop, they would have been dumped. And we've got a paper on this, too. It's called Reaction to a Complex Rotated Object in the American Quarter Horse. And the reviewers made me put the American Quarter Horse in there. Man on a horse, person on the ground. Two different things. So if you have cattle that have only been handled on horseback, look, those cattle there have a small flight zone, but a person walks in there, the flight zone's now 3 times bigger. That can get real dangerous in small pens. So it's fine to work cattle on horses, but before they leave the ranch, let's train them to go in and out of a pen on foot. So if they go to an auction barn or a packing plant, they're used to going in and out of a pen with people on foot. There was a 50-year-old lady that died. They got stomped on by cattle that probably had only been handled on horse. Very bad. Then I don't like this. This teaches them to kick. Get them used to all different vehicles, different people, big trucks, little trucks, four-wheelers, just all kinds of different stuff, so they don't get afraid of it. Now, you manage what you measure. And for years, I put a lot of facilities in a lot of plants. I've got my center track restrainer in all the big beef plants. We put that stuff in the 90s. If you want to see how that works, you can look up Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. Half my clients tore it up and wrecked it. Then I taught McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's how to use basically the beef quality assurance measurements with stunning measurements. In fact, beef quality measurements came from me originally. It's very, very simple things that you can measure. Because if you don't measure things, then bad becomes normal. How many animals run? How many animals fell during handling? How many animals went down on a knee coming out of the squeeze chute? How many vocalized when you're trying to catch them? How many did you use an electric prod on? Is my score getting better or is it getting worse? And there's a big difference between some hard-to-handle cattle and some not hard-to-handle cattle. Now, you make a simple change in the equipment, I can then tell if it helped. The vocalization score went down when I put a light on the entrance to the chute, of the dark chute, because I didn't have to use a prod on as many cattle. I reduced pressure on the neck right here. I went from 23% mooing when they were in this head gate that squashed their neck down to none. Yeah, made a simple change, I could see the improvement. Also, false floor, when you're using conveyor restrainer system, the thing's 7 or 8 feet off the floor, you don't want the cattle looking down and going, it's a cliff. So you put a false floor in just below their feet and it looks like solid ground. This is the McDonald's audit stuff. Back in 1996, I collected baseline data for the USDA, and only 30% of the plants could stun correctly on the first shot 95% of the cattle, because they had broken equipment, busted equipment. Then in 1999, I started teaching McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's how to do the scoring. Boy, things got a whole lot better. And they didn't have to buy a whole bunch of new stuff. I bent over backwards to make whatever they had, and there were some older, shabby places, make it work. Stunner equipment had to be kept repaired. Non-slip flooring, some lighting. We had to get rid of some people. 3 plant managers had to go. But I saw more change in 6 months than in my whole entire career. And out of 74 plants, only 3 had to buy something expensive. The rest we fixed with simple changes. I was really, really proud of this because I made people manage equipment. Oh, broken side adjusters on the restrainer, they had to repair that. And it's directly observable stuff. But I only measured 5 simple things. When you hang it up, they better be unconscious. First shot efficacy, 95%. 1% falling. If you want a good prod score, it's 5%. No more than 3 out of 100 mooing when you restrain them. Very simple outcome measures. Very simple, directly observable things, kind of like traffic. It's not a paperwork audit. I'm concerned that a lot of stuff today is just turning into a paperwork audit. No, it worked because it was very simple. They knew exactly what they had to do. Now, there's kind of 3 types of measurements. I can have an animal-based measurement, which this is. I measure falling. I measure vocalization. And then you have a few practices you just ban, like you're not allowed to stick something up its butt. That's going to be a failed audit if you do that. And getting away from exactly what kind of equipment you have. We're measuring the outcomes. Now, let's just look at basic cattle welfare. We want to do handling scoring. The big issue that's happening right now is we're getting more and more lameness, and it's genetic because we're selecting so much for these meat traits. I've got a picture of a 4-month-old heifer with a twisted toe. She hasn't had any grain. That's genetic. Body conditions, skinny animals. Ammonia levels, that would be indoor animals. Heat stress, if cattle breathe with the mouth open, they're too hot, period. Now, let's look at lameness. A lot of different things can make animals lame. But the thing that's most likely to make animals lame around here is genetics. I like to look at genetic selection sort of like a national budget. If I put everything for selection into the economy, I want you to grow fast, just produce. I shortchange the infrastructure. Reproduction in the dairy cow, bone and foot structure, hearts. There are some groups of cattle, fat cattle, when they go to the plant, 30% of them have swollen hearts. That's horrible. It's genetic. And maybe I'm shortchanging immune function. Everything takes energy. Okay, feedlot lameness, this is not something to be proud of. This is brand new data. 8% of fat beef are lame. And one plant that specializes in the huge fat ones, it was 32%. That's not something to be proud of. I can remember 20 years ago when fat beef had almost no lameness. Leg conformation. We need to be selecting for good feet and legs. The Angus Association has charts for this. That's a steer at a show with a very straight leg. You wouldn't breed many cows. I was down at the Denver stock show. I think they're putting them in refrigerated rooms, and they grow this long hair. Now you have a fluffy leg. Then they bring out the fluff ball. It's the grand champion. You can't even see the body. They got so much fluff on them. There's a pig with a hideous foot. I've also seen the same foot in cattle. Boy, that needs to be beefed. Please don't breed that. That's just a mild case right there of corkscrew claw. There's a real bad case. That 4-month-old heifer's on the tilt table. And that's her foot. That's horrible. That's genetics. And that happened on a small ranch back east. They were just breeding for weaning weight. Weaning weight. Then they take them down to the sale barn, sell them with no vaccines. Then when they get to the feed yard, they all get sick. Congestive heart failure. 4% fat cattle have late-stage congestive heart failure. In other words, they're getting just ready to croak. And anywhere from 20 to 30% have heart swelling. And it's related to sire. It is definitely genetic. This is not okay. Okay, here are some of the hearts. There's a heart scoring. And up there on the right, the number 1, that's your normal heart. And then you've got different degrees of bloated soccer ball. So if you have a cow that drops dead, I'd open it up. It probably may have congestive heart failure. If it just drops dead and there's no reason. Yeah, obviously we've got to make sure that we don't do things that would look really bad on a phone. And people often ask, when does tapping an animal with a prod or with a paddle become beating? Well, I have a video, proper use of livestock driving tools. And you tape up an empty cardboard box, and when it starts to crush, tapping has become beating. And there's a few input measurements you might need, like space on transporters, on trucks. But the trend now is to go a lot more with the outcome variables. What are things that we can do to improve how we handle cattle? First of all, you've got to make sure you don't have horrible neglected health problems. That's getting better. Like cancer eyes where the eyes rotted off. Implement numerical scoring. Just like out on the highway. There was actually a highway where they stopped enforcing traffic laws for a while. The accidents went up. They constantly got to be out there with the speed cameras. Highly motivated behavior needs, that's mainly for your indoor animals. And that's my website. And what I want to do now, and we've got plenty of time, to work on the stuff that I really like doing, which is doing questions. And we're going to have a mic that's roving around. We'll do questions. And then I've got quite a few autism books out there left and some books that explain different kinds of thinking. But questions is what I like the best. And we're going to run out of cattle books, but I can show them to you on my phone.
So my family has a lot of cattle go down in the squeeze chute in a V chute, and they start choking out. What would be the best way to prevent that?
Okay, then they choke. And you usually probably have a head gate that's got...
Yeah, it like tapers down to a V.
Yeah, well, the head gate tapers, that's where you want to use a squeeze chute that's V-shaped, so they can't lay down.
Okay.
If you've got a head gate, a lot of the newer squeeze chutes are just going with a straight head gate, and they won't choke in that. But if you have a head gate that's got an opening like this, and they go down, then it presses right here, and they can die really quickly. And in that type of chute, you either need to have it V-shaped, or you have to have a belly bar. Okay. So they can't lay down. Because some of the newer squeeze chutes, since cattle are getting fatter, have straight sides that go in and out like this. That needs to have a belly bar in it so they can't lay down in it.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's something, if they lay down in that chute that's got the head hole like this, yeah, they can die real fast. And you better get that head gate off them real fast, or they'll die.
You were referring to, twisted toes and grain-fed. Can you explain that relationship?
Wait a minute, let me just go back to that twisted toe. Let me just go back to that slide. She's not grain-fed. That's a 4-month-old heifer on a tilt table. She hasn't had one drop of grain.
So what's the relationship between grain-fed and
Well, you can
twisted
get
toe?
founder.
Okay.
But there's no way this animal was foundered. It's too young and it has not had any grain.
Okay, so just genetic.
This is genetic. You're seeing right there is genetic. They had her on a tilt table. They're going to try to trim her feet, but you shouldn't be breeding this cow.
Yeah.
It's a 4-month-old heifer.
Yeah. So
And then,
are you saying if
and
if
then
you feed
this
them grain,
is a less severe case of twisted claw. Then another thing you should not have is a hoof slot that's like an oval. Hoof slot ought to be straight.
Okay.
And then if you have a hoof slot that's like an oval, that's also a bad foot.
Okay.
And then the other thing, I showed you that horrible peg. Well, that's really bad. I've actually seen that in cattle where the dew claws are down on the ground. That is a very, very severe defect. And these problems are getting worse. I think there still is a place for visual assessment to make sure we're breeding sound cattle. I'm very concerned about some of the stuff we're breeding in pets too. Bulldogs that can't breathe, naked dwarf cats with knee joints that bust out. That's not okay.
So again, going back to the grain, is it okay to have grain or grass-fed, grass-finished?
Well, what
cattle?
some people are doing is they're doing a grass, mostly grass, and then grain finish. And since there's a natural program, I'm not going to name it, but this is where the specifications are not done right. It's important in a welfare program to specify some really bad stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Like having them in a foot deep of mud or something like that. And so what's happening is, all they say, you got to have them out on pasture a certain amount of time. But then when they grain finish them, they burn them up with grain, the livers are falling apart, they're feeding them 95% grain, and about that much chopped hay, chopped that long, the livers are coming apart, and they've got them in a crap hole. If they're grass finished, you won't have, there's no way they're going to be foundered if they're grass finished. But you can still have these bad feet in grass finished because they're genetic. Yeah, that foot is genetic. Has nothing to do with what you feed it. She's a 4-month-old heifer. She's had grass and mother's milk. That's all it's eaten. And there's some of the beef on dairy have got horrible feet. No, these feet are genetic because you blindly follow EPDs like for high weaning weight. No, that's not caused by feed. No, that's something and you don't want. And then the Angus Association does have charts of the different kinds of bad feet. They have a very nice foot scoring chart. You can just go Angus Association hoof scoring. You should be able to find it easily online. And then I have a paper on, it's called Problems with Lameness and Congestive Heart Failure is Increasing in Grain-Fed Steers and Heifers. There's all the references to those things are in that paper. Problems with lameness and congestive heart failure are increasing in grain-fed steers and heifers.
Why do you think horses are scared of plastic bags?
Well, because plastic bags move in a very erratic way. They tend to be unpredictable, and you can get horses more used to that stuff by just gradually introducing them to it. But sudden, novel things scare. You know, we found that when we did that rotated play set, it looks totally different rotated. Like the slide might be like that, and then it goes to like that. That looks completely different. It's good to get animals used to a lot of different things. The animals that get the most scared when they go into a new place are the ones that have lived too sheltered a life. Like the cattle that have seen one farmer and one old truck, that's all they've seen. They're the ones that freak out when they go to the sale barn because everything is new and scary. And the animals that have seen all kinds of vehicles, all kinds of kids, all kinds of different stuff, they tend to get less scared when they go to new places. I hope that answered your question.
Are any of the beef producers using like genetic screening for their breeding programs?
Well, what's been found with the congestive heart failure definitely is related to genetics. You know, eventually they might find a genetic test from it. The beef on dairy, in beef on dairy where you have a Holstein dairy cow bred to an Angus bull, they have good records. They know which sire bred every single calf. And they have traced congestive heart failure where they were dropping dead in the feed yard back to a single Angus sire. They got rid of it. They didn't tell me which bull it was. But it definitely is sire related, and it's related basically to over-selection for meat traits. You over-select for any trait, you're going to ruin your animal. You know, the bulldog that's so flat it can't breathe, can't have its babies naturally. Now, I think and the problem with these problems is that when I first came to CSU, congestive heart failure was only a high-altitude sickness, 10,000, 12,000 feet. That's no longer the case. It's no longer just at the high altitudes. It's slowly been getting worse. Now it's kind of come to a head, and people realize, yeah, we've really got a problem with this. Yep, and I can show you those two papers. I can get them up on my phone, and you take a screen picture of those papers.
What's your favorite breed of cattle and why?
Well, I like lots of different kinds of cattle. But what can be a problem is when any breed gets too popular, whether it's dog or whether it's cattle, that's when you start to have trouble with them. That's something, and I'm very concerned both in pets and in livestock, some of the breeding problems we have. Like breeding a naked cat with leg joints that just break. I'm going, really? You think that's cute? I don't think that's cute, but... Okay.
Why are cows afraid of shadows?
Well, they're afraid of novelty. And so they're going to be most likely afraid of shadows in a new place. Like an experienced dairy cow will walk over a shadow that she sees every day in the milking parlor. The new heifer is going to stop at it. And shadows keep changing. And you don't bring your cattle into the work area every day. And so it's something different. And what Dennis found in his study is the sharp shadows were the worst. The more indistinct shadows, when there were some clouds over the sun, were less likely to scare your animals. The other thing is animals will show you the stuff they don't like. When they come up the chute, they'll stop right at the piece of string that's on it they don't like. Or they'll stop right where they can see a reflection off a vehicle that's parked along beside the facility. They'll show you the things they don't like. Take those things out of the facility, works a whole lot better. Okay, right there, or just tell it and I'll repeat the question.
Like you were talking about in your previous one, where you're having colleges are going towards the higher tech stuff, and we don't have our carpenters.
Okay, well, one of the things, if you were at my first talk, that's all I talked about.
Yes.
Was all
So-
the different kinds of thinking and how we have object visualizers that are good with mechanical things, but they're horrible at math.
I agree.
And I'm very concerned that they're getting screened out.
So I was an agribusiness major in college. Are the colleges still having those classes? Are we trying to get young people
Well, people,
into
you're
ag
right here at one of
colleges?
the best places in the whole states, right here. They're doing some great things here. And we had to discuss, don't have an algebra requirement for vet techs. You're going to screen out some of your best vet techs. I worked with people, like when Montfort had the big fab shop, and with other places, barely graduated from high school, they were inventing and patenting equipment, but it was all mechanical things. And those people have retired out. I was just talking to a professor here, and the two kids that were super good with mechanics had to drop out of engineering because they couldn't do the math. But you see, there's two parts of engineering. There is the visual part, which is all the mechanical things, and then the more mathematical stuff. And you need to have both. Because what I found in building a beef plant, for example, that the people that can't do the math, they make all the mechanical equipment. They'll be the drafting technician that lays out the whole factory. We don't touch refrigeration, we don't understand it. That is for the mathematical minds. And I think they've run out of my visual thinking book. The book's called Visual Thinking, got kind of a white cover, and I discuss that problem. And I can show it to you on my phone. It's just called Visual Thinking, got kind of a white cover with colored letters. And I discuss the problems of losing skills of these mechanical kind of people. But they can't do higher math. I'm one of them. I've never passed an algebra class. I majored in psychology to dodge math classes.
When breeding, what can you do to cause less anxiety throughout the herd? Or not breeding, branding?
Well, branding's going to hurt. There's no question about that. But if you can handle them calmly, at least they don't come in crazy. And if you measure cortisol levels, yes, branding's going to increase cortisol levels. But fear, if you handle them really bad, also really, really raise those cortisol levels. Fear can be a very, very strong stressor. You know, and do it right, do it calmly, get it done quickly. That's the thing to do. Okay, over here. So you're talking about if something's going to hurt them. Wolves, so this is a really hot topic. And there's a professor at CSU called Paul Angelista, and he's worked with some sheep people, and they do night penning. The sheep, it actually works pretty well. They got one guy in a camper, one shepherd in a camper. He's with the sheep during the day, and then they pen them in that electrified netting, and he's right there with 5 guard dogs. That's worked pretty well. Night penning in cattle works, but it requires a lot more labor. Well, you see, this is the problem. And the other problem is the wolves they bring in don't even have natural behavior. They're bringing them in from all different kinds of places. Because predators learn what to go after. That's another thing. Well, they've been working the sheep night penning. That takes a single shepherd full-time, one shepherd in a camper. And then you move the night pen every few weeks. Now, there's a ranch that's doing night penning of cattle. The labor requirements are really high because they're camping out there right next to the night pen because human presence helps keep them away. You know, and then you have I went out one place and there was a wolf that came up on somebody's doorstep at their house. That's the roof you shoot. Also, these two places, I visited them this summer, they had lots of natural prey. There was a lot of deer there. If you don't have enough natural prey, you're going to have problems. And I was in British Columbia years ago, and they ran out of prey, and the wolves formed megapacks, and that got really scary. Yeah, there's the problem we've got is you got people on both sides of the issue that are so polarized that you can't even discuss it in a rational manner. There will have to be some lethal control. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean go out and shoot everything. The ones that develop a taste for Angus probably have to be taken out. Because predators, mama teaches baby what to eat. But if you don't have enough natural prey, then you're going to be in trouble. The places I went to had lots of deer. I saw them. I saw lots of deer everywhere.
I'm kind of wondering, what are the effects of poor stockmanship on the cattle, and in particular on the leather produced from the cattle?
Well, the poor stockmanship, you get them a lot of more fear stress, they're not going to gain as well. Now, in terms of leather, you scratch the surface of the animal, that damages the top grain. And that's not going to get used for car seat or for a leather jacket if the top grain is scratched. I'm very disturbed by the latest beef quality assurance report on the amount of buckshot that's been shot at cattle, and they are finding it in the meat. This is not okay. Also, the x-ray equipment's gotten really good. They've got some x-ray machines that look like science fiction machines, and they can find buckshot. But in the latest beef audit on cull cows, every single plant reported finding buckshot in meat. That's not okay. I was very, very disappointed in that. That people are using shotguns to move cattle. That's not okay. I was disappointed in that finding. It's on the Beef Quality Assurance website. Not good. And I think they're finding it better because they have better x-ray machines now.
Dr. Grandin, I was going to ask, as a veterinarian, presented with a cow with twisted toe, in a rescue situation, if it's a pet or if it's a rescue animal, do you advise veterinary care to bring in a team like the farrier and
well,
to
let's
try
say
and
it's an
rehabilitate it?
animal's almost like a pet. Yeah, you can keep it.
Yeah.
What I don't want to see this heifer in the beef herd breeding more and more cattle that have got this crappy feed.
Right.
If it's somebody, animal you just want to keep for almost like for a pet, yeah, fine, trim its feet
Do you feel
but it's not an animal I want to have in a breeding herd.
Right,
and just
right.
breed more and more and more of these bad feed.
right? But being presented with one like that, and it's a solo situation, you have advocated
Well, if the animal's just basically a pet,
a pet or a
well, then you
rescue
can just fix the feet and don't breed it.
Yeah, right. But
Yeah, then
fixing the feet
then
is
trim her feet
realistic?
and don't breed her. That's what I would do. But if that's a breeding animal, it needs to go to the feed yard and get beefed.
Yeah.
That we shouldn't be perpetuating that. That's a really horrid foot. And they've gotten worse. That's a picture that's 10 years old, 15 years old, not as bad. And now we're finding this in a place where all they're breeding for is high weaning weight.
Yeah.
There's this little small ranches on the East Coast so they can dump them off at the sale barn
Yeah.
at the heaviest weight. No vaccines and
But you're finding they're rehabilitatable if you can catch them early and
well, if you're gonna just keep the animal for pet,
for comfort.
go ahead and fix its feet. Yeah, do that. Go ahead and fix its feet. But I don't want to be breeding bad feet. That's the thing I don't want to be doing.
Right.
Yeah, I would go ahead and fix its feet.
Right.
Let's say you just want to grow it out for meat, go ahead and fix its feet so it's not sore. That I would do. I just don't want it in the breeding herd. And she's on a tilt table. She was about ready to get her nails trimmed.
Perfect.
It was a vet that sent me that picture.
Okay, cool.
That works back east. Yeah, you go ahead and trim it. But it shouldn't be in the breeding herd.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you might want to just grow it out for beef and then trim its feet so that it's not going to be lame. Yeah, that would be the thing to do so it's not in pain. Yeah, I would do that.
Perfect.
Hi, so I have a dog that's afraid of like hardwood floors.
It's afraid of what?
Hardwood floors.
Because it's skidding around and can't walk on the hardwood floors.
Okay.
And you might need to just put some runners down. Put some runners down that the dog can walk on. Is it
Okay.
a big dog?
No, he's a little blue heeler mix, and so we have rugs kind of everywhere, and he just kind of slides across.
Well, he has
them,
trouble
and
walking on it. And that's why it's so important, I recommend the vet clinic to put a non-slip floor in on the exam table. Like maybe just get a bath mat with a rubber backing and put that on the table so the dog isn't in the brace position. Animals freak out when they start slipping. Now, some of the dogs, I watch a lot of dogs down at the Denver airport. There's tons of dogs down there now, and they've got very smooth stone floors. Most of the dogs have been fine on that. I did see one guy drag a terrified dog onto the escalator. That was a really bad thing to do, and he did it before I could say anything. And it was absolutely terrified.
Over here, Miss Temple. I had a question on your last topic. What do you think would be a single way of helping end bullying in school-age youth?
Well, a lot of kids that are different are getting bullied in elementary school. Fortunately, my teacher explained to the other children that I had a disability that was not visible, like a wheelchair. So I managed to get through elementary school without being bullied. You know, it's called peer-mediated remediation. And the places I was not bullied was where I had friends who shared interest. Riding horses and getting them ready for 4-H horse shows was a place I was not bullied. I was in the Model Rocket Club. That was another place I was not bullied. So I'm a big fan getting some of these students that are different into places where they get friends who shared interests.
What would you do with, like, high school of you can't not be in that situation? How do you...
Well, it's a real problem. I think some kids that get bullied so bad they need to be taken out. I was one of the students where regular high school didn't work. I got kicked out of 9th grade. I chucked a book at a girl who called me a retard, went to a special school. You know what they did? They put me to work taking care of the horse barn. I cleaned 9 stalls every day, and I put them in and out, and I fed them, and I didn't do very much studying, but boy, I learned how to work. I made up a lot of the academic stuff later. No, it's a real problem, all this bullying. And then the online stuff just gets worse and worse.
What would be something you'd say to try to help somebody at this point if they are getting
Well, let's
bullied?
try to get some friends who shared interest. There's a point where they need to be taken out of that school, maybe finish up online, high school. But I want that person, if they're at home school, if they're like 14 or 16, they need to go out and get a job. They got to get out and start working. You know, I'm seeing too many kids labeled autistic, they aren't learning work skills. No, they're not going to just be sitting home online, finish school up online, let's get out and start working. That's the thing to do. I think there's some kids where they need to go from being a child to a grown-up and skip all the teenage nonsense. That was the worst part of my life. And you know what? I think I'll end it on that.